Hi, and welcome to the DEARG podcast, the podcast that brings you education and information about endometriosis and adenomyosis. My name is Kathleen King, and in a turn of events tonight, we have Johanna, who joined us previously on the podcast, and Johanna has kindly agreed to put me in the hot seat tonight, and I'm going to be the interviewee. So, Johanna, all over to you.
I like how you say kindly agreed, since I pushed you and be like, let's do this, Kathleen. I think it'd be really interesting to hear you side. So brilliant to be back. Since you've been interviewing already so many important, interesting people that brought so much value to the podcast, I thought you would be such a good person to talk to because, and I don't think that's just my opinion, you are Ireland's leading advocate in endometriosis and adenomyosis with the most reliable, accurate education information. You've put so much time and effort into making resources available, and I think you have a huge impact on people's lives, on how certain policies are going. So I think it would be really interesting to hear your side. So would you want to give us a little overview around your own endo journey and how or why it led you into advocacy, and what do you do? Like, what is your very unpaid volunteering endo advocacy job in Ireland or globally?
No problem. So I suppose, first of all, to start my own endometriosis journey was back when I was 12, and the day I got my very first period, it was December, and the pain was absolutely off the charts, off the wall, ended up in the heat and bled horrendously. And at the age of 12, you don't really realise that this isn't quite not normal. But this went on for a wee while. But at that age, I was involved in the Order of Malta at the time. I was very medically orientated. I knew what I was going to do. Like, I was, either going to do nursing or I was going to be a surgeon. Like, I was so into reading everything. And we had a medical textbook at home, one of those home books that everybody had, I think, kicking around the house in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. And I read about dysmenorrhea, and in particular, I read about endometriosis. I was 14. And because at that stage, I had realized that nobody else was having the same issues that I had, and I was chatting with people at school and they were like, no, we're not bleeding for 7 days. No, we're not dying. So went to the GP, and I was delighted with myself because I was like, I have the answers. So went to the GP, and she just lost the plot. And she was like, you can't have that. You need to be over 30. There's no way that you have that. Stop reading books. You're just looking for time off school, and you're just looking for a way out of things. And eventually I pleaded for pain medication, and I was getting mefenamic acid. And yourself, like with the Constant, it does a little bit, it doesn't do a huge amount. And over the time, as I started to learn a little bit more about endometriosis, which is very difficult at the time because, again, no internet, there was very few books on it. There was, it wasn't really talked about. And the little bit of information I did pull together, I learned about hormonal suppression. So went back and asked for the contraceptive pill. And again, that was a drama. So it was going to be that I would have to have, a parent's signature to get this, that I was looking for contraception underhandedly. Again, I was looking to get at school. I was looking to do all sorts. Eventually did get put on the pill, put on many brands of the pill, because with my cycle being so strong and so horrendous, nothing was really controlling it. So I sort of fast forward a bit then through my college years, missing all sorts. Ended up on my placement year here in Letterkenny. And one of the first things I did was, because we got paid for a placement, I decided then to see a gynecologist privately. So, of course, the GP here, this is about the 9th or 10th GP, very reluctant to refer me. And I said, look, I want to be referred into Northern Ireland. I have a particular gynecologist in mind. So she wrote the letter and wrote on the letter, the very last line, I'm very happy that there's nothing wrong with this patient. However, she insists on a referral. So off I go into Derry. I have this appointment. Now I go in, like, I have a book this thick, and I'm going to my symptom diaries, and I have my arguments all prepared, and I'm really, really fired up, but I'm nervous because I'm thinking everybody's fobbed me off to this point. They all think I'm particularly nuts. And I was only in there less than 5 minutes, and he goes, yeah, you've endometriosis. Of course you do. That's like, what else would it be? And he goes, we'll do a laparoscopy and confirm it. So that was confirmed in the March of 1997. And it was amazing because at the time, there was nothing they could do laparoscopically. We didn't have the surgical instruments here to even remove it by laser, let alone excision. So it was really a visual diagnostic laparoscopy, which we now know is so outdated. But he came around, put the thumbs up around the curtain and went, yeah, you have endometriosis. And when I say I went home on a cloud, and it wasn't a cloud of anesthesia or pain meds, it was a cloud of like, I am right, I know I'm right. But that very quickly then started trying to, okay, what do we do about this? More hormonal suppression, okay, more heavier hormonal, treatments, things like that. And one of my colleagues brought me home. You paged for one of those magazine articles, can't even mind which one it was, and they had the UK Endometriosis Society at that stage was called the National Endometriosis Society, and they had a helpline. And I was like, brilliant. This is it. Now I'm going to get accurate information. I'm going to, see how we get on with this a bit more. And I phoned the helpline. And I also contacted the Irish organisation at the time. And I got a lovely letter back from the Irish organisation, but they had very little activism. They had very little going on. The UK, I did phone the helpline. I had a horrendous experience. And the person who took the call was watching a very famous soap at the time. Didn't turn down the TV, and also give out horrendous misinformation. So you can imagine my reaction to that, straight on to the UK Society at the time, and lost the plot. So thankfully at the time, the support network manager came back and said, look, if you think you can do better, come and join us. And I took them up on the offer. I was very fortunate. I was trained to work on their helpline, or to volunteer in their helpline because you weren't getting paid. I was also trained then to do different support scenarios, and I was trained as a chronic disease self-management tutor as well through the UK organisation. And I stayed with them until about 2005. And it was great. It really, really was very good. And it was great grounding, but it also gave me an outlet then to, I suppose, address this anger and frustration and this knowledge that nothing was going to change until we started speaking about it. And I suppose on my time at the helpline, what I was really shocked about was the level of health literacy. And the majority of the calls were from women, and they were from women who had suspected or may have had a diagnosis of endometriosis. You occasionally had calls from family members, so maybe partners, parents. I took calls as well from some employers. But the level of health literacy around the menstrual cycle really shocked me. People did not know that the cycle should be between 28 and 32 days. They did not know that there's 4 phases of the cycle. They did not know, how ovulation occurred. It was shocking. And it was like, okay, we can see why if women don't understand it themselves, how can we explain it to others? How can we get this across? And I suppose that in itself led to, a lot of online work sort of starting to happen then. Internet started to come on, a bit more mainstream in Ireland around this sort of 97, 98 time. And I was finishing my degree then in Northern Ireland. And it gave me a great opportunity then to start to branch out into the online world. And that's where I was very fortunate to meet Nancy Peterson, who we all know and revere. And also Heather Boudon, another absolute advocate who I really look up to, and she's become a very close friend. And between both of them, they really inspired me to, I suppose, look for accurate information, share that accurate information, and not to sort of not to get caught up in my own personal story, but to use that anger and frustration and experience to help educate others and to guide them through so that they didn't have that 9-year delay to diagnosis that I did. So I suppose that's the sort of background of the advocacy. Fueled by rage, fueled by anger, always am. But it's what you do that I think that's important. And I have burned myself out on more than one occasion. I tend to do too much. I tell everybody about pacing and looking after themselves and self-care and all that. I do absolutely none of it. I'll just burn through it and burn through myself, and I'm not the best for that. But in terms of what I do, it's been mixed. So back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s and that, I then took over the Endometriosis Association of Ireland as chairperson. And a lot of people know me through that. I left the organisation in 2020. And during that time, we ran a lot of patient events. So we had the information days, we would have had, the EndoMarches and, support groups, bits and pieces like that with an online forum as well. Now at the moment, I am involved in the Irish EndoMarch, which is, again, will be coming up this year on the 24th of March. I've the DEARG podcast, which we're talking on right now. I'm involved in MISHRE, which is a schools project with myself and a few other advocates. We are going to go into schools and talk about menstrual and endometriosis education. I'm really looking forward to that. And again, trying to secure funding for that. I'm involved in the research side with OnaWave Medical and also with a company called JOII. And I'm also an advisor for Telehealth, which is a new social media app for clinicians and accurate information. And I suppose on top of that, then you've got, I suppose, the experience with the ESHRE guidelines, where I was one of the expert patients and to feed into that. And then there's the usual, there's the talks, there's the one-on-one support. There's loads of things that go on, and then maybe contacts for media. But I suppose the thing that underpins a lot of this is that this isn't a paid position. And it's very hard even to get funding. And it's very difficult sometimes to ask for costs or ask for things to be covered because you're so desperate to get that information out there that you don't want to say no. But unfortunately, this year, given the complexity of projects that I'm involved in, and it's taken up a huge amount of time, I'm having to start to say no. And I'll give you a good example. In 2019, I had burned through all my annual leave and as much unpaid days as I could take from work. And I had just used up so much. I was at so many endo conferences and I had taken days off to catch up on EAI work and a lot of things. And it cost me my graduation from my master's. And ironically, my master's project was in the use of the internet for endometriosis treatment and surgeries and that. And the paper's been published and the research has been well received. But I missed my graduation because I had no days left to take and I really couldn't afford to sort of, put that time into that. And I suppose that made me reevaluate a little bit that, it's impossible to reach everybody and it's very difficult to do it on a one-to-one basis like I had been doing for the years before that. Even through a national organisation, I felt that I was quite hamstrung. I think as an individual, I'm better, trying to sort of do things my way. I'm very headstrong. I don't take direction very easily. And I think having that flexibility to do things myself and to choose the people who work around me, I think is very important. And I'm very lucky. I'm surrounded by some very, very good advocates and who've become very good friends over the years. So that's a long-winded answer, but I hope that covers it.
And I'm pretty sure you still left out a lot of things because I think people don't realize it's a full-time job living with endometriosis, but it's also a full-time job working in advocacy. And I always say to people, I have this job where I advocate for endometriosis and better treatment and accurate information. And I have a lot of work colleagues. We all work together for the same cause with basically the same aim, but no one pays us. And we are just on the small ground. You are the one who's been doing so much more for the past decades and was already path that way. And the amount of time and money that goes in and emotional work, people are really underestimated, hugely underestimated. You have your life, you still deal with the implications of endometriosis, and then you still have this other job. And we only have 24 hours in a day, but the problem is also there are just so few people, and whether it's the healthcare professionals who are up to date with endometriosis or the people spreading information who are up to date. And because it's so prevalent, I think we get this sensation or this urge of but we want others to be better, so we keep spreading that information, which also means because there aren't enough people who are actually up to date, we also spread ourselves really thin. And I think there's such a huge risk for burnout.
It is. It's so true. And I think one of the things that people don't realize that if you're speaking to them on a one-to-one basis, that, you might be following somebody's journey very intimately. You could be talking to them multiple times a day over a period of weeks or months or sometimes even years. And that person can suddenly disappear from your life, be it that they've had their surgery and they're gone, or they've had their pregnancy and they're off doing something else, or they simply just don't need that level of interaction, and there's a bit of a loss and a bit of a grieving with that. But equally, there's the other side when you get, the post-op recovery pictures and somebody is off, like diving off a cliff into the water and they're having an absolute ball, or they've just gone for a walk around the outside of their house, which is an achievement for them, or they've taken up something that they really love, or you get the 6-week, 12-week scans, and I don't know, I've lost count of how many endo nieces and nephews I have, but it's incredibly emotionally draining as well as physically draining. And yeah, when you're dealing with your own symptoms on top of that, it can be very, very difficult. And I think most of us are driven by the fact that we do not want anybody else to go through this. When I started this 25 years ago, I did not think that in 2024, I was going to be meeting 14, 12-year-olds, 16-year-olds who are suffering and still facing the same things that I faced, back in the 90s. That's not right. And I feel that as a failure. I feel that as a personal failure, and I shouldn't, because it's reflected worldwide. So despite all our collective efforts, we're still not hitting the mark. And you'll have heard me speaking with Heather on the podcast as well too. And as advocates, we get a lot of abuse. We get a lot of things thrown at us that we're putting words in people's mouths, or we're misrepresenting information, or we're making decisions for people. And as an advocate, your role is to support, your role is to educate, your role is to be empathetic, and your role then is to give structured information in a format that can be used. You will never hear me say, go and have this drug, this treatment, this banana. You're not going to hear me say that, because we're all so individual. Yeah. And I'm not the person to look to for the model surgery. I've had 8 surgeries. I should have known better that after surgery number, let me see, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it was, that something wasn't working. But unfortunately, in my time, laser and ablation was state of the art. I had most of my surgeries in the UK, and it was by somebody who was very skilled and experienced, and that was the best they could do at the time. And unfortunately, like I've said to people, like when you have repeated surgeries and you have that repeated interventions as well into and all the hormonal suppressions and all that, you are going to end up with long-term damage, be that chronic pain, be that, bone density loss, be that your mental health is completely shattered. It's wide ranging. And I think we're back to that sort of informed consent again, that health literacy, making sure that people understand, first of all, their cycle. They understand endometriosis and its relationship to the cycle. We know it's certainly not defined by it, but it can play a role in exacerbating those symptoms. And that patients understand their basic physiology and how their individual symptoms affect them. Because for me, my pain might not be the same as anybody else's. I may not have the same breathing difficulties that somebody with diaphragmatic or lung endometriosis has. But if somebody can understand their own body, their own function, that makes it easier then for them to sort of compact that information, summarize it, and then bring that to their GPs. And I think this is where the chronic disease self-management courses are very good. There are some run in Ireland as well with the HSE, and they teach you to live with a chronic illness. But what they teach is action planning, and they teach you tools like remembering to take your medication, which seems completely silly. But how many times have we all forgotten, even to take pain meds when we're rolling around the floor in pain? I've done it. I have 2 alarms on my phone every day, and I still manage to miss things. So I think we can always learn. We can always share information. But it's choosing who you hear that information from. I think that's important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think you cut on some really interesting things that I want to go a little bit closer into. First being, in your eyes, what makes a reliable, a good patient advocate? Is it the person experience? Because after all, it's just one experience, which is very individual, and we don't know what sort of treatment the person got. Or is it that you have some medical training? Like, are we better advocates because we have some sort of degree as a healthcare professional? But we also know that there are healthcare professionals who are responsible for treating endometriosis, and unfortunately they are not up to date. So is a medical training relevant for being an endometriosis advocate? Is it the passion, the desire to help? Is it the anger that fuels you, that gives you that drive wanting to help? Or is that even enough? Like, what makes a good, reliable endometriosis advocate?
I think the first thing would be that you have to have an open mind, and realize that things change. Certainly back in the sort of late 90s, I was reading about excision. It wasn't available here. It wouldn't have mattered what I'd done. I was never going to have excision surgery. The one person who was doing it in the UK went off to Australia. But you have to have an open mind, knowing that things change, evidence changes, symptoms change, people's personal, circumstances change as well over time. So I think having an open mind and knowing that you need to listen to the experts, you need to listen to other people, you need to have that very sort of open and active listening as well, I think is very important, because we all go in with biases. I might hear a particular doctor speak and I'm going, oh, I know he's just going to recommend hormonal suppression. Okay, but hear him out. Look at the patients that he's dealing with. Maybe there is some particular reason for that. I think a medical background is beneficial, certainly when it comes to reading a lot of the scientific papers that are out there. It used to be that you could rely on a lot of the information once it was published and peer reviewed, but unfortunately we're seeing that now, that the studies are not of good quality. And that was quite obvious when we were doing the ESHRE guidelines. There's not a lot of high quality research done in endometriosis. So that makes it even more difficult. So when you have sort of weak recommendations and guidelines, it's very hard then for advocates to pick out those pieces and sort of say, well, can we really stand behind this? Is this something that's very important? And while the personal experience, of course, is going to drive you, it can also drive you to bias. And something I have seen over the years, and I've seen people who are very good advocates in terms of getting information across or, bringing people together, but becoming very focused maybe on a personal story or very negative experience as well can lead to a situation that can be very frightening or intimidating for other people as well too. So it's very important to have that tempered balance and always try and remove yourself a little bit from the situation. And it was advice given to me a long time back, and the lady is dead now. She volunteered with me in the UK, and it was along the lines of, you have to have your own shit together before you can help anybody else, And I think the nice polite way of putting that is now, people who refer to the oxygen masks on the plane, put your own mask on first. You do have to have your head in the right space. You have to be able to accept criticism. You have to be able to, speak to other advocates. You have to be able to speak to other healthcare professionals. You have to speak maybe to people in the community that you don't necessarily agree with. And you may find yourself in a situation too where, like myself, like taking part in the ESHRE guidelines, you'll find yourself then as being a point of anger for a lot of people who don't agree with the outcomes or some of the outcomes of the guidelines as well. And then you sort of see that trap where the balance is, do we have patient representation at all in things like this? Are we better having a seat at the table in some description, or are we better just not? And I always think it's better to have the patient voice represented so that we can shout as loud as we can. We may not always get our way, we may not always be heard, but I think it's very important to make sure the patient voice is represented. So you need a lot of different qualities to be a good patient advocate. I do think the passion and anger is a good driver. I think you do need to be able to put your own personal story aside, use your experience surely, but look at things objectively. What works for one person doesn't work for everybody. What's the latest trend on social media? Be that, cutting banana leaves or cutting nerves or cutting out uterus or cutting out ovaries, whatever it is, it's a trend. Look at it, with a sort of scientific objectiveness. And again, I'm going to paraphrase good friend Heather as well in saying that we need to approach endometriosis as if we were fighting for somebody within our family, our best friend, our sibling, our daughter, our mother, our father, whatever it is. You need to make your decisions based on that, that you're looking for the best information out there. You're looking for that most accessible information out there and not necessarily going with what's popular at the moment. It's a tricky one. I think with the explosion in self-publishing, like remember I was around in Web 1.0, I'm that old, where we had bulletin boards, we had email lists, we had very static content. And then we had this explosion of self-publishing in Web 2.0. which is what we have now. So we've got all our social media, we've got our self-publishing blogs, we've got the likes of this podcast, we've got blogs and all of that. And that's led to a huge explosion in people sharing their own information and people sharing their own stories, people sharing their own version of the facts, which I still find absolutely soul destroying. The majority of information that I see out there, unfortunately, I can't share. And, it's, that somebody's taken the time to go in and try and do their best. But unfortunately, if if it contains a lot of misinformation, I know it has the potential to do harm. I'm of the era where I have supported patients who have had their ovaries removed along with their uterus in their 20s. No children, no chance of having children, no chance of, going into a natural menopause or a progressive menopause in their 20s. And we're not just talking about 1 or 2 people, I'm talking about a considerable amount of people at that time, because that's what was considered best practice locally. That's what was considered the only thing we could do with these people. And if we were to listen to certain people on the internet, we would start thinking, but sure, yeah, castration and hysterectomy, sure, why not? Sure, of course, it makes sense. Retrograde menstruation, no periods, no endometriosis. Simples, but we know that's not the case.
Just
so
because
again,
it makes sense doesn't mean it's true.
This is it. And look, if there's anything I've learned with endometriosis and adenomyosis in the last 25 years, we know almost nothing.
And I guess it's the personal story that's important, because it makes people realize, oh, wow, like you open up, you speak about it. Oh, wow, I never knew you had that. I never knew it was that bad. But I think you can only help people if you then also follow it up with accurate information, because like you said, it can do so much harm. You might mean well trying to help other people, but you don't help other people by sharing misinformation, even if you're not aware of it. And learning what's up to date and accurate in endometriosis care is a big job. It's not just you read through a couple of internet blogs at the weekend. It's a lifelong learning. Once you grasp it, once you know where to find the accurate information, once you know which sources to trust, to be critical, like you said, with research, it's not done with that. You're constantly updating because there's new research coming out, even if it's bad research that's being criticized, that's being compared, that's being discussed. And it's a huge job.
It is. And it requires a lot of sort of discernment, doesn't it? When you look at a particular account, it could be your favorite account. And I know sometimes that, I'll see a post, go up about something, you're like, really? And you sort of have to think a wee bit about it yourself, but I think we always have to think the potential for harm.
Yeah.
And just because somebody might have, so many 100,000 followers and, they may be, glamorizing something as a GnRHA treatment. I've seen that recently, which actually shocked me. Somebody trying to glamorize being in pseudomenopause in their sort of mid-20s. I thought, how do you glamorize bone density loss, vaginal dryness, bladder infections, joint pain, hot flushes, headaches? Wasn't getting that myself, And again, as you say, that person story is a great introduction, but we have to have the facts.
Yeah.
And I know people are sick of hearing me saying that. They really are. I think, I even roll my own eyes when I hear myself saying it, because it just wrecks my head so much that, we would have put a lot of work, and certainly I would have put a lot of work into education when we had the online support group on Facebook in particular. And we had a great group there. It was really, really good. And you would spend a lot of time going through things with people, and, we would line up media articles, and you would do your best to get all the information out there, and people would do a brilliant job. And the journalists would go and pull out a random fact somewhere about retrograde menstruation or how hysterectomy is the ultimate cure. And you're like, that's just soul destroying. We've spent so long trying to dispel these myths, and one publication, one podcast, one video online, and that could be enough to undo decades of work. And people think that's an exaggeration. It's not. People are still lining up and asking for hysterectomies for endometriosis. They're lining up to have their ovaries removed, again, for endometriosis, because they're desperate. They're desperate for treatment, and they're desperate for something that helps. And like I always say, if, like wearing orange knickers, standing on your head in the garden at midnight is going to reduce your pain. Go for it if it's not doing any harm. But unfortunately, surgeries, hormonal treatments, medical procedures, they do have harm. They do have outcomes. And I think we always need to be aware of that.
I think that's the huge thing people forget when they have the passion, the anger to do share the story. You have a huge responsibility as well. People are gonna make possible decisions based on the information you're giving them, and that will hugely impact their life. And misinformation and myths and things that are not correct when it comes to especially something like endometriosis. People basing their decision making, what information you're having, what treatments they're opting for, will hugely impact the life quality. So you have a huge responsibility that the information you're sharing is correct, is up to date. And I think you're gonna look up twice your resources when you know how huge the responsibility is. So I think this is a really nice I think this really leads us to the question, like, why do we actually need advocates? And you already mentioned a couple of really important things, how things didn't seem to have changed that much and how we just didn't know any better, and the poor quality and all those kind of things. So that really leads us into, why do we need advocates? Can you talk a little bit more about, and you already mentioned briefly, the Irish situation, how to access up-to-date education and care for endometriosis in the past and now? Has there been any progress? Where are we now? And maybe can we look a little bit into what's globally? Is Ireland the international standard? Is it below? Is it above? So that'd be quite interesting if you I just let you get off with that.
Ideally, we would not need patient advocates. In an absolute ideal world, you would not need to hear me banging on about this every single day of the week. But unfortunately, we're not in that situation yet, and I think we're a long while off it. We need advocacy because it does change lives. And while you may have a negative article in the media or a negative social media story that goes out, there is also positive ones out there. And during my time, especially with the AI, where I ran a lot of media articles, and I was very fortunate to work with the screenwriters on Fair City to write in for Endometriosis for a character. And, we had a lot of radio interviews and bits and pieces, and you sort of think, they're small, okay. But the amount of emails that would come in and say, oh, I heard you on the radio, or I read that patient's story in the paper, or I happened to see Fair City, and I think I might have that, or my sister might have that, or my cousin, or, it was amazing the amount of feedback that you would get. And not always at the time. It could be a while afterwards. You might, somebody might pick up a leaflet, or they might hear you speak on something, and they'll come back to you maybe months later. And that's happened to me quite a lot, where people have said, oh, I've heard you on the local radio. I'll be like, oh, that was about 2 years ago. And they're like, yeah, but it stuck with me what you said. So I think this is what's going on. So the role of advocacy is important because it does break down the barriers, I think, between healthcare professionals and patients. It allows that more personal touch as well too. We tend to be a lot more driven in terms of what we do. So we're both doing this out of hours. We both have full-time jobs. We both have a lot of other things we could be doing on a Friday night. But you're driven to give that time and to give up your free time as well too, which means that you want to make this work and you want to make it successful. So when you look at patient organizations around the world, a lot of them they were founded sort of mid-80s, late 80s. The EI in New Zealand are probably some of the oldest in the world, along with the UK. And they were very successful on the whole because they were a way of getting information out. And if we look at the Endometriosis Association in America, which was run by Mary Lou Balwick, we received newsletters, printed newsletters, typed up and printed, and they came in the post. And it was brilliant because this is how you knew what was going on. But it was all we had. But again, it was that sort of link between not being able to access that peer-reviewed information that hadn't really made it online yet, or was behind paywalls or completely inaccessible for people. So organizations like that, they broke down that information and made it into something accessible. And we're seeing the modern day version of that now online. We have some good accounts who do actually break down information and explain it in an accessible way. I don't think I'm a very good science communicator. I try my best to break down the information, but I think I find it very hard to explain things. But there are definitely there's a lot of people out there, and again, Heather Goodone would be one of the best for that. And shares a great amount of information through the Centre for Endometriosis Care. Nancy Peterson's group, again, a lot of information shared there for research, I think, which is very important. In terms of the organizations, then this was their role, and then it shifted more into the support realm as well too, and giving out more individual one-to-one and group sort of support as well too. But unfortunately, in the last number of years, there seems to be a shift in trust in the organizations. My own research, which was carried out in the 2018-2019 period, looked at the use of the internet like around treatment decisions for endometriosis. And the overwhelming message in that was that people really trusted their national organizations. They trusted that factual information, and they found that it was accessible. It helped them to make decisions. It helped them then to plan what treatments that they were going for. And not just the national formal organizations as well too. Nancy's look was one of the highest rated within that as well too. So it was very reassuring to see. But one thing I would love to do is I would love to repeat that study now, because if you sort of look at the social media landscape at the moment, that seems to have shifted. There seems to be less of an emphasis maybe on, putting forward the scientific information, and maybe just putting forward maybe more the crowd pleasing information, or maybe putting forward what's perceived to be a little bit easier read. And there is always that health campaign, and certainly because I work within the health service, you're very conscious of it, where you need to have a clear English campaign. You need to make sure that it's accessible for the patient, that it's written in, very basic English. And a lot of things can be done like that. But sometimes when you oversimplify things, endometriosis becomes, retrograde menstruation again, and it's endometrial tissue, like our lining of the womb, stuck to things. And you think, when you simplify it the wrong way, you're not getting that accurate information across. So I think as advocates, we tend to maybe keep both sides in check. We keep the patient side in check. We try and represent their voice and represent the feeling that's on the ground, and sort of what's going on in the world. And we tend to feed that back into, say, like research groups, or into like the likes of the guideline groups and things like that as well too. And on the other side then, we act sometimes as a buffer between, maybe the healthcare professionals and also the patient groups as well too, taking maybe information back that's coming out and through research, or through, sort of like even anecdotal, because a lot of the surgeons don't have time to publish their outcomes. So it's mixed, and I would love to see a time where we didn't really need advocates as much, but I think now we certainly need them more than ever, unfortunately.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of this JARG episode. Part 2 will follow in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody.